Before I introduce our guest, wanted to say it has been fun talking with all the many unique individuals who rock climb, hike, extreme hike, professional photographer, business owners, even a radio station owner, many unique people who presently call the Pemigewasset Valley home. One subject we haven't really touched on is the history of the Pemigewasset Valley. Once upon a time, the largest logging railroad in New Hampshire operated in Lincoln, the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad. Towns like Peeling and Thornton Gore formed, were built, and abandoned in the 1800s. The largest sawmill of its time was located in Woodstock in the early 20th century. Recreation opportunities rapidly grew and were enjoyed by visitors and locals alike. Hiking, kayaking, rock climbing, snowmobiling, skiing, just to name a few activities. Throughout this time period of growth and change, there were many, many unique individuals who called the Pemigewasset Valley home. Which brings us to our guest, Betsy Beach. Betsy's family has had property in the area for over a century, and Betsy has done extensive research on individuals and families who were instrumental in making some of the attractions to the White Mountains possible. She has written a series of articles for the Upper Pemigewasset Historical Society and has a lot of information she would like to share. So, on the Pemi Valley podcast now, we welcome Betsy Beach. Hello, Betsy.
Hey, John. Thanks a bunch.
You're
So
welcome.
I'm a summer resident of North Woodstock, and I've been coming to the Valley for my entire life of 68 years. My family owns a cottage on Parker Ledge Road that was built in 1917 by Leander or Lee Parker. I'm going to talk about the Parker family and the cottages that were built on or near Parker Ledge Road by Curtis Parker and his son Lee in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Some of the owners of these cottages have interesting ties to the history of hiking and rock climbing in the White Mountains. The first Parker, Reuben Parker, came to the valley in 1842 from Vermont. He purchased land on the southern end of what is now Parker Ledge Road. And as a side note, until about 1940, Parker Ledge Road was part of Daniel Webster Highway until the state rerouted Daniel Webster Highway to its current location below Parker Ledge Road. By the time Reuben's son Curtis died in 1902, the family owned over 300 acres of land in North Woodstock, a blacksmith shop on what is now Soldiers Park, and a sawmill on the Pemi north of town. And today you can see the concrete dam near Fay Reservation that replaced the wooden dam about 1910. Over the course of the 1900s, most of the land was sold off by the Parker Family Trust, including a sale to the town of Woodstock to operate the Grandview ski slope until 1940s when it closed in 1955. Back to Curtis Parker, who was a prominent figure in Woodstock. In 1883, the state hired Curtis and his crew of 40 men to clear the debris from the Flume Gorge after the flood that dislodged the famous suspended boulder called Table Rock. Also, Curtis helped to build the Warren Road and the Carriage Road up Moose Lock. His son, Lee Parker, was born in 1880. As a young man, Lee was a guide at Lost River, which opened as a tourist attraction in 1912. And this was before the bridges and ladders that tourists experience at Lost River today. Lee also drove one of the first cars up the auto road on Mount Washington. And I learned a lot about the adventures of Lee Parker from a diary that I found in the desk drawer of our family cabin. Curtis and his son Lee built 5 summer cottages on or near what is now Parker Ledge Road, including our family cottage. They also built a 40-foot high observation tower on top of Parker's Ledge for the North Woodstock Improvement Association. That tower is obviously no longer there. So here's the story of the summer cottages and their owners. The cottage owned by Frank Carpenter, named Ferncliff, was built in 1892. Frank Carpenter was one of the founders of the North Woodstock Improvement Association in 1897. The North Woodstock Improvement Association published a series of guidebooks titled A Little Pathfinder to Places of Interest Near North Woodstock. He served as counselor of exploration for the AMC in the late 1880s. One notable trail improvement under his tenure was the old bridle path up Lafayette. The Ridge Trail off Mount Lincoln to the west is called Carpenter's Ridge. And upon his death in 1913, Frank Carpenter's ashes were scattered off the summit of Mount Lafayette, his favorite mountain. In 1898, Frank Carpenter published his guidebook to the Franconia Notch in the Pemigewasset Valley. The chapter on North Woodstock includes descriptions of his own cottage, Fern Cliff, and spots along the river like the Eddy and Sweetheart Rocks. I have a copy of the original 1898 book, and it is a gem. I highly recommend this book to any of your listeners who are interested in the history of the Pemi Valley. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a copy of his 1899 map of North Woodstock and Franconia Notch. A fun fact about Frank Carpenter is that he named many of the caves at Lost River, including the Guillotine in 1896. My family connection to Frank Carpenter is that his widow sold the property to my grandfather, on which our family cabin was built in 1917. But back to the cottages built in the late 1800s by Curtis Parker. The summer cottage of Carl Harrington was built in 1894. It was nicknamed Quisiana and located high on the northern slope of Parker's Ledge. Carl Harrington was a professor of Latin at Wesleyan University when he purchased the land from Curtis Parker. Carl Harrington was an important figure in the history of hiking in the Whites. He, along with Frank Carpenter, was one of the founders of the North Woodstock Improvement Association in 1897. I mentioned that. And then he served as counselor of trails for the AMC from 1923 to 1925. And during these years, several key links were completed, including the Bond Cliff Trail from Bond to the East Branch Valley, the trail across the Mahoosic Range, and the first through trail along Kinsman Ridge to the Easton Road. And Harrington Pond on South Kinsman is named after Carl Harrington, and Eliza Brook is named after his wife. He also oversaw the replacement of the original Liberty Springs shelter, which he had erected years earlier. For more information about Frank Carpenter and Carl Harrington, I recommend picking up a copy of White Mountain Hiking History by Mike Dickerman. The cottage owned by Herbert William Kahn family was built by Curtis Parker in 1895 on land that he purchased from Carl Harrington. So Herbert William Kahn and Carl Harrington knew each other from Wesleyan University, where they were both professors. The cottage was located near a ledge known as Artist's View. The cottage was torn down in 1940 when the state rerouted Daniel Webster Highway to its current location below Parker Ledge Road. Okay, all you rock climbers and cavers, you'll be interested in the story of Herb and Jan Kahn. Jan was the granddaughter of Herbert William Kahn. She married her first cousin, Herb Kahn, not to be confused with her grandfather, Herbert William Kahn. As children, Jan and Herb spent summers at the Kahn Cottage on Parker Ledge Road, or near Parker Ledge Road, hiking and climbing the Whites together. The concourse route up Cannon is named for them, but I don't think it's recognized as an official route anymore. Some of your rock climber listeners might know.
We can get to the bottom of it.
In 1946, after Herb served in the Army, he and Jan headed to West Texas. They did odd jobs living out of a truck. Eventually, they landed in the Black Hills of South Dakota. In 1951, they chanced upon the unclimbed pinnacles in the Needles. They bought 30 acres of land near Custer, South Dakota, and built their home, Kahn Cave, against the side of a rock outcropping. And as a side note, 2 years ago, I talked with Jan's sister, and she said that Jan, who would have been 94 at that time, was still living in the cave without electricity or running water.
That's
Herb secured a job maintaining the stone faces of Mount Rushmore. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, they were hired by the National Park Service to survey, map, and light over 60 miles of trails in Jewel Cave in South Dakota, making it the world's third largest cave system. Herb and Jan Kahn are very famous in the rock climbing world. In addition to the routes on the Needles in South Dakota, they established climbs like Carter Rock in Maryland and Seneca Rocks in West Virginia. So just Google Herb and Jan Kahn, and that's C-O-N-N, and you'll find lots of information. So John, how are we doing on time?
Oh, we're doing fine on time. It's if you still have more information you'd like to share, well, we're still wide open, and that is.
Oh, I'll keep going.
I just hearing about the Kahn couple right there. It's just funny to think that like where they started at Parker Ledge Road, some of the things that they had done, and they're like the real deal. They're living out of a truck in Western Texas. Then they go to South Dakota, and if she's still here, was living in a living in a cave, with no electricity. I'm like, that's wild. That is, they were true to their beliefs.
In the book, I have a book called Jewel Cave, and it has pictures, and it shows that the house, the back part was truly a cave. I mean, in the rocks. And then there was an outcropping in the front area that they built out. But yeah, Kahn Cave.
That's pretty awesome.
Really, really interesting. You're a rock climber, people will most likely have heard. And if they have not, they should look into Herb and Jan Kahn.
I was just thinking, I'm sure some of them have, and I'm sure some of them would love to learn more. And it was something interesting too when you talk about Parker Ledge Road. And I don't know if you saw my reaction when you said something about the observation tower. I'm like, I've been up on Parker's Ledge before, and I have found remnants. And then I was trying to look up fire towers, and I never saw a fire tower being up there. I'm like, what were these cables for? And I found foundations, cables. That's what it was for, the 40-foot tower, which must have had some. Parker Ledge, just to tell everybody, it's cool. The view that truly a unique view that you have looking into Lincoln, looking eastward to Tecumseh. Like it's a really great view. Now I'm trying to imagine a 40-foot tower on top of that ledge. That must just amplify.
It was actually never a fire tower. It was an observation tower. It was built for the North Woodstock Improvement Association. So I don't think they ever had any kind of, related to watching fires.
Oh, but, no, that's it was funny because I remember looking up fire towers in the area. There used to be one pretty much across the valley. That's why when I saw the foundation, I was like, I don't think there was a fire tower here, but now you've just given me the answer.
Yeah, there were actually two of them. The first one was replaced by the second one, and there's pictures of that you can see in the history books.
I'm gonna have to check that out, and then also the Grandview ski area, which you still have. The lift line it's the remnants of the Top Shack I haven't looked at it in over 10 years now, but I remember there was a local guy who found an actual lift ticket from decades and decades ago underneath the floorboards. And you can go check that out on nelsap.org, New England's Lost Ski Area Project, and look up Grandview, and you'll have there's a picture of that actual lift ticket. And it's pretty neat. I think a lot of the lift lines kind of destroyed now because of houses being built up on Grandview, but fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah, and keep in mind, a lot of that land was part of the land that the Parker family owned in their heyday, of where they had about 300 acres of land. So, So I'll go on and talk a little bit more. There's two more cottages that on Parker Ledge Road, and these were built by the son of Curtis Parker, Lee Parker, one in 1912, and our family cabin in 1917. So in 1912, Lee built an A-frame cottage nicknamed Millstone for Lucy Kahn Potter and her husband, John Potter. So Lucy was the brother of Herbert William Kahn, who I mentioned earlier was one of the founders of the North Woodstock Improvement Association and of the Kahn Cottage. Their son, George Potter, married Mabel Harrington, Carl Harrington's daughter. So there's a lot of family connections between the Kahns and the Harringtons. The cottage still stands across from the cemetery on Parker Ledge Road and is owned by Mabel Potter's great niece and her husband. The last cottage is our family cottage. It's nicknamed Three Pines. As previously mentioned, my grandfather, William Beach, purchased the land in 1960 from the widow of Frank Carpenter. And Lee Carpenter supervised the construction from plans that my grandmother found in House Beautiful. Only the roof had to be changed to allow for better runoff. A mason from Maine was imported to build the chimney using rocks that were brought up from the river by my aunts and uncles. So, and here's an interesting tidbit. The common thread that three of these cottages had in common was Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Carl Harrington was a Latin professor at Wesleyan. Herbert William Kahn was a biology professor there, and my grandfather, William Beach, was a minister of a church in Middletown. After Carl Harrington's death in 1953, Wesleyan bought his cottage in 1955 as its outing club, but the structure was destroyed by fire in 1961. Wesleyan built a new outing club in 1965, but sold it in 2004. My family has many ties to Wesleyan since my father, my two uncles, and my brother all attended Wesleyan.
Oh, okay.
So that's the
common,
formal
very
end.
interesting common thread right there. That was pretty neat.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay, and it's pretty cool when you do like that. As soon as you say the A-frame, I basically look at that A-frame almost every day when I drive into North Woodstock. That's fascinating. It's funny, the amount of information that you've just shared. I'm trying to like digest all of it at the same time. I'm like, I'm looking forward to listening to this again so I can understand better.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
well,
I think some people may not be aware that what is now Parker Ledge Road was the old Daniel Webster Highway.
I was, as soon as you said it, though, now it doesn't surprise me. And I think a lot of listeners, people interested in the area, when you do walk on present day Daniel Webster Highway, also known as Route 3, you can walk off the road here and there, and you'll find old pavement from when that road was the original Daniel Webster Highway. And there's actually just across from near where my house is, getting closer to the railroad tracks, just exploring many years ago. And it was as funny as the ground, it just kicked away the leaves. There's old pavement from decades and decades ago. I'm like, it's interesting to see how the state had just straightened it out in certain areas that they could.
Well, in this case, they took the straighter route, which, if you're headed south on Route 3, south of the village, and, like Rustic Rivers on the right and the Grandview Estates, it would be straight to go up Parker Ledge Road. But now the road curves to the left, again, if you're headed south, and, then there's 175 with the Green Bridge. So they actually rerouted it to make it lower, but it has a bit of an angle now. Not angle, but it's not straight.
Oh yes, oh yeah. I think that was probably just what they were looking for, of something level instead of having that hill.
And you can see when you look at the old maps, like the Frank Carpenter 1899 map. You see what I'm talking about. There was a road that went diagonally, kind of where the Parker Ledge Road now goes up the hill. Again, if you're headed southbound. There was a road that went diagonally down to the Green Bridge, the Fairview Bridge, because the bridge has been there a long time. Mm-hmm. And that's now a driveway. And you can see from the other end where the road would have been connected, but now there's no connection anymore. And that's now a driveway. And that's actually where the Kahn cottage was. You can see the old steps. It's the only remains of the Kahn cottage. There's some step. You have to know where to look. Going up to where their cottage would have been. But then their cottage basically would have been right where Route 3 is now.
Wow. And you said if you know where to look, you could actually still see those stairs.
Yeah.
It's just reminding me of when you said that, how in the Parker family, when they owned the, where the remnants of the dam is across from where the Christmas loft is.
Exactly.
Just up from the Christmas loft. On the other side of the parking lot, you have there's a staircase there, a small staircase, stone staircase, and I've never figured out who was going to or who owned whatever house this was going to. and it looks like stairs as if it would be going to a front door. And it's just kind of neat. So if you park in the Christmas lot parking lot, just walk, like I said, walk north, and you'll hit them. And it's just kind of wild. You step back and go, was there a house right here, or was there a sidewalk where this went to? Haven't quite figured out what those stairs were for.
Maybe if you look at the old map, because a lot of the old maps actually called out the residents, the owners of the cottage.
I'll have
You'll
to have to try it again, because I think I looked one time or maybe I might have been confused exactly where it was when you're taking the old map and putting it to, like, what's in your head, in present day. But it's neat. I mean, I just love going over the history. There's so many different factions. It's not just, let's say, logging or recreation, as you've just been talking about all these families so far. And there's many more families to talk about and many other generations for you to talk about. But this was great. This was a great first podcast interview, Betsy.
Well, I'm so glad that you were thinking about expanding to historical topics.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I initially reached out and said, most of your audience seems to be hiking and nature related, but how about some history? And
Absolutely. Oh, yes. No, I've been wanting to get into history. See, this was a sign for you to contact Doris, who has been on the show before, and then she put me in contact with you. So this was great. So I'm very happy that you wanted to be on, and will definitely have to do this again, because I know you shared a little bit of, as you're talking about how some of your relatives helped with the Appalachian Mountain Club forming some of the hiking trails. So there's lots to talk about there.
Yeah, and I made a plug for a couple of books. Again,
Mm-hmm.
Mike Dickerman's History of Hiking.
Which you can get at the Mountain Wanderer in downtown Lincoln.
White Mountain Hiking History. Yeah. Steve Smith's shop, Mountain Wanderer, has this book. And if you go on to Amazon and look for Frank Carpenter guidebook to the Pemigewasset Valley, that has just lots of interesting information as well.
Two great books right there. Two great books, and then your wealth of knowledge. That I'm sure that it's great that you shared this with us and the listeners. It's great. So yes, go down to the Mountain Wanderer. So of course, if you have some great books about hiking and the history of the White Mountains with hiking, and it's great. Well, Betsy, thank you very much for joining us. And do you have any final words before we unfortunately have to sign off?
Well, maybe in a future podcast, I can talk a little bit about my family's years on the trail gang. Both
Yes.
My father and my two uncles served. My uncle's in the 20s and my father in the 30s. My father was 4 years on the trail gang. So, we can maybe talk about that.
Oh, no, we're definitely going to be talking about that in the future. All right. Well, Betsy, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
We'll definitely talk to you soon.
Take care.